Welcome to the NABS podcast. NABS is the support organisation for those working in advertising, marketing and media. I'm your host, Louise Scody. Each week I'll be chatting with someone from our industry to find out how they support themselves and those around them through challenging times as well as the day-to-day. And it's all to help you support your own mental wellness. I can't wait to start chatting. Xavier Rees is AMV Group CEO, leading agencies with an enviable roster of clients, including Currys, Mars, Guinness and Essity. Since joining in May 2024, Xavier has assembled a formidable new leadership team, reshaping AMV's offering under these key brands: AMV Media, Native at AMV and AMV Works. Prior to AMV, Xavier spent 8 years as CEO of Havas Creative Group, starting as CEO of Havas London and ending as CEO of the group of 5 agencies. Xavier's previously been named Campaign Magazine's Agency Head of the Year. He's received Oystercatcher's Outstanding Contribution Award, and he's regarded as one of the industry's most celebrated campaigning leaders. He sits on the IPA Council, and he's chair of the IPA Talent Leadership Group, the FE's UK board, and the Purpose Disruptors Advisory Board. Most recently, he was named in the first cohort of WACL Allies. In 2020, Xavier was named on the IPA's first ever I-list, recognising the industry's inclusivity trailblazers. Welcome, Xav, to the NABS podcast. It's quite amazing that with all of the stuff that you do, you had some time to speak to us. So thank you so much. So let's jump straight in then. What is a mental wellness challenge that you've had to face?
Well, a few over the years, I have to say. Sometimes my own, but also really significantly some situations in my family with more than one family member, which I've written and spoken about before. I don't need to go over old ground necessarily in terms of how that all unfolded, but just to say that I definitely went through a period of my life where I realised that the mental well-being or illness that some of my family members were experiencing meant I had to really look at the priorities that I was operating with, made me realise that work really wasn't and could not be the most important thing in lots of moments. But also gave me my own challenges about how to deal with that. I feel like to some degree I had it easiest out of all my family members at the time on reflection, but at the time trying to work out how you keep yourself sane and hold down a job while you are trying to be a decent husband and parent at a difficult time for the family definitely was an interesting time in my life where I learned a lot. Tried my best, but probably could have done better. So yeah, and then like I say, more recently, I have I defy anyone, frankly, to say that they're operating in this industry right now without some sort of level of higher anxiety than they were naturally operating at 10 years ago, 5 years ago even. And so that comes with its own, the very least, questions you ask yourself and things you have to do, or at least I've had to do, to keep myself in a good space and to continue to be a half decent leader. So I mean, you could sort of pick any of those angles, but definitely mental wellness and mental health, and I would single out mental illness as well, because I think sometimes we think mental wellness is all one thing, but I think that I've experienced a fair bit of mental illness, and I think it's important to point out that is and can be quite crippling for families and individuals, so on and so forth, and also make you stronger out the other end.
That's a really important distinction. And the way we view it as at NABS is that you will have your mental wellness, which is something that we all have and we all need to keep topped up. And then sometimes some of us will experience more specific mental illness challenges. And that is a great time to go to your doctor and go and get some specific help for that particular challenge. With what you're experiencing, when we chatted previously, you were very keen to point out, oh, I'm not the hero in the story and the people that were affected were my family, but I still had to deal with supporting them and showing up to work. And I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people in the industry whose kids are going through stuff and whose partners are
Mm.
going through stuff. What were a couple of those practical steps that you found out could help you? And also, how did you deal with it at work? Because if you were taking some time away from work, perhaps to go to be with your family and help them with whatever they needed, how did you manage to navigate that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I definitely always had a work version of myself and a home version of myself, and I would choose which bits of each I would share either side. Uh, but most importantly, of course, at work quite often you don't know a lot of what is going on in someone's personal life, and people choose not to share it. And I was one of those people. Um, what I realised, I feel like I read something. I can never remember what it was, but what I realised is there is the bigger the gap between the reality of your situation and the version you are portraying to people at work, people anywhere, frankly, but people at work in this instance, the greater the space is for mental wellness issues to grow. So I struggled without sharing stuff for a while, but then I realized I couldn't really carry on without people knowing what was going on. And that was interesting because actually it led to me being much more honest and transparent with people at work about things ongoing. So actually what happened is I realized that I'd only just started. It was my first CEO job at Havas, and I'd only been in it a month, and I had to um, let my team and my boss know what was going on. And I remember thinking about the best way to do it. I probably wouldn't do it like this now, but actually, maybe it was a good thing. I sent an email to my boss and my team saying, "Look, I need to tell you about something that's going on in my family life," and then I explained it. Explained not in massive detail, but explained that it was the seriousness of it, and why it was serious and what that meant. And it was fascinating because I was so nervous pressing send. So I've been nervous many times. I'm nervous every time I send an email, frankly, but I don't think I've ever been as nervous as I was when I sent that email. But sending that email was probably the making of me and the making of my relationships with my boss and my team. Because the first thing that happened was my boss at the time, who's a guy called Chris Hurst, he said to me, "You never need to mention this to me again unless you want to. And you never need to ask me if you need to leave early or shuffle things around. The only time you need to talk to me about it is if it's affecting your ability to do your job the way you want to do it, and to achieve the things you want to achieve." Then my team similarly just were grateful to know. And again, my reflection is I probably couldn't have done it without them, because they shaped, we all shaped together a kind of interesting team structure where actually probably the net result was everybody being able to spend more time prioritizing things outside of work. I think we probably worked as hard as any of us had ever worked in our lives during that period of time at Havas, uh, but we did it in a more compassionate way, and in a way that enabled us to make choices to prioritize our family in ways that maybe none of us had done before. I hope that's how some of the team reflect on it. Maybe they reflect on it that actually they had to get around me to enable me to do that at the expense of their own personal lives, but I hope not.
It sounds as though you role modeled the way to be open about what you had going on for you so that you could all work together where you weren't going to feel extra pressure that you didn't need at that point.
Yeah, probably by mistake. Like, it's so funny because in those moments, all you're trying to do is your best.
Yeah.
And actually, you're frankly just trying to stay afloat and to not fuck up your job in some ways. What actually happened is and it's a really uncomfortable truth. It probably led to me becoming a much better version of a leader than I would have otherwise become. And yeah, so I suppose what did I, back to the question, remove that gap of what's going on in your personal life, and what's really going on with your family's health. If you've got a problem like that, just remove that gap, be honest about it. But also what I was doing was updating people, so how as it got worse, I would be honest about the fact that it was getting worse. And you have to be careful about how you communicate it. But I think everybody went on a bit of a journey with me about having those kind of conversations as well. So, and then I also learned that if you don't prioritize yourself to some degree and look after your own physical and mental health, and I deliberately say the word physical first because I do believe that looking after my physical health in that period helped me look after my mental health.
Yeah.
So I'd quite often feel very selfish and guilty about prioritizing things like going for a run or going to the football, which was a real point of decompression for me. Although I didn't go to the football that much during that period, well, not as much as I have done otherwise. So just knowing the things that are going to help you gain perspective, reduce anxiety, feel physically capable of doing all the things in your life that need doing. It's the first time in my life I felt like I had actively had to make sure I achieved those things.
You had to make sure you had some time for yourself where you weren't dealing with the various competing demands and worries, and you could just go and be you for a bit.
Yeah, but I mean, more than anything, probably yes, yes. Although, like, I'm literally talking about small amounts of time.
Yeah.
Uh, but I also actually this literally being physically fit enough to be able to deal with the challenges. Because and think about what I was eating and all these kind of things, so that I could be in a good enough shape to keep my mental self together and to be able to exist with less sleep than usual and more anxiety than usual, etc., etc., etc. So it's funny. Yeah, it is about creating space for yourself, but you can see I almost have guilt about even acknowledging that now,
Yeah.
was because actually I rightly or wrongly saw it as necessary to make sure that I could do my best with in the family setup and at work. And like I say, probably all you can do is your best, and probably neither was as good as I wanted it to be, or anybody else around me wanted it to be. But you just do what you do, and it's only later you reflect on whether you were role modeling or you were uh, giving yourself time, or you felt guilty about any of it, because it's all just happening to you. So, yeah,
I'm really sorry you went through all of that, but actually it sounds to me like you dealt with it in a pretty good way. That
yeah.
making sure that you were resilient mentally and physically as much as you could be so that you could show up for everyone else. It sounds like a sensible way forward.
Yeah, yeah, and like I say, I'm never sure whether I showed up, fully in the way everybody wanted me to or needed me to. But you just do your best, and I think that's probably another thing to say is you sort of have to give up on all of those ambitions to some degree. You just have to kind of. I mean, I think you have to think about how you can possibly try and achieve everyone's expectations, or maybe it was my own expectation myself that were the most demanding. But you have to realise you have to let go of some of those things and just allow yourself to be as good as it is possible, which was in
Absolutely.
as it turned out.
Well, you've been doing something else fairly stressful recently, which is guiding the company through a merger. So you've gone from one frying pan to another. But actually, you've got some really interesting takes on how you support staff through what is a massive change and a change that lots of people in the industry are going through at the moment. We're hearing loads about mergers and acquisitions. And how do you make sure that it's successful so people are feeling okay and as happy and mentally healthy as they can be through in a period of immense change?
Yeah, well, first thing to say is and I was reflecting as as I was sort of on my way to coming and having this conversation. It is some mergers and acquisitions have been something that have been part of this industry forever. Um, so I suppose that's I do think they're happening in a different way and scale right now. But the first thing I always think is useful to do is sort of step back and look at some wider context and realize that actually we're not experiencing something that is a shock to the system that the industry is not seen. I just to try and try and not to minimize what's going on, but to try and normalize it at least. Like, for example, and maybe this is unusual, but I've been through 3 or 4 merging of companies in my leadership journey. Most notably, I was part of the leadership team that brought Adam and Eve and DDB together. And then,
Hmm.
Hammers had bought work hard prior to me arriving, but very much the task when I got there was to turn that into a single agency. And now I am here a few months into bringing 2 amazing agencies in AMV, BBDO, and FCB London together to create a new formidable version of AMV BBDO. So first of all, I think normalizing it is always good. You kind of just to kind of make sure that you realize this is something that people have gone through and will go through again, and is kind of normal in business. Probably happening more often, like I say, and greater scale. I think it's also happening against the backdrop of greater um, average global anxiety.
Yeah, that is certainly true.
So I've learned a few things along the way. Probably think I learned mostly, and by the way, I suppose the things I've learned were about how to try and make a success of merging 2 companies together. Part of that is ensuring people feel supported or that there's clarity, etc. But I'm not sure I'll be able to answer this in a way which is right. This is how we supported people through this time. I think what people want is transparency, clarity, and an understanding of where things are heading. I think that's what people always want. And I think that becomes even more important in a time of change and merge. And so, what I have learned along the way is if you are going to be merging 2 companies together, you need to act really quickly. It's interesting. There's a theme here, isn't there, about closing the gap. So the bigger the gap is between people learning that they're going to be merging with another company and then it actually happening. The
Yeah.
bigger the gap, the more the space for negative, human beings breathe negative thoughts into vacuums, I was taught. And
Yes.
that's true in a merger situation because people double down on their own cultures unless you, and quite rightly because that's what they know and they're proud of what they built, etc., etc. And so if you don't move really quickly to bring everybody together, then people invest a lot of their energy in what will quickly become the past rather than investing all their energy in making a great future in the new organization. So definitely what we did this time, much to the pain of my leadership team, was we really did move very quickly. So, I mean, the teams only found out in the weeks before Christmas that this was definitely happening and that it was FCB London and AMV BBDO that was coming together. I mean, telling the short version of the story, by the 20th of January, we had moved 100 plus people from FCB into the AMV offices. That involved closing moving stuff and people. It involved what we wanted to make sure is that when everybody arrived, they felt like it was a new agency, whether they were already sitting in the agency the week before, you know, the AMV that was, or whether they were coming across to the new building and they had been with FCB. I wanted everyone to feel like this was their agency. And there were 2 things that important about the way that the AMV floor had been set up. One of them was there was lots of work on the walls, creative work, and the other one was that the meeting rooms were named after campaigns that we had made for our clients. And so what you want is for people to arrive feeling like this is their agency. So it
Yeah.
might sound very surface level, but very important. All the work was changed so that we had equal amounts of work from both of the legacy agencies that were coming together. The meeting room names were changed so that we had those. So if you're coming from FCB, there were meeting rooms named after your clients' campaigns. But also, we had moved really quickly to make decisions about who the department heads were going to be and sitting the departments together from the off. So, what we didn't have, which I have seen in both of the other examples where we brought people together, if you bring people together quickly, but then put them in their silos, then it doesn't feel like a single agency. So everybody walked in on day one so if you're in the creative department, you walked into the creative department, which was now bigger and better and more interesting because it was made up of people who were previously working with 2 separate agencies. you walked into an account management department or a strategy department or production department, and you were a part of a bigger thing than you were before. But you were part of one department and one agency, not um, two siloed groups of people who were still in the same agencies they'd left behind, except for the fact that the name had changed, for example. Um, so that was one key thing. Also, communicating really clearly. So, within 48 hours, I was over at FCB addressing the agency, talking to them about how I thought this was exciting, making sure everybody felt like this could be a good thing. And also getting really clear on an agency strategy really quickly so that we could share that with the agency and be clear about what the task was. And we have achieved all of those things. Now, if I look at some other agencies who have gone through mergers, not within Omnicom, I hasten to add, that would be remiss of me. It's taken them months to achieve what we achieved. We had to work very hard at it, but we really, really invested high energy in making sure all of those things happened very, very quickly. It's had two effects. One, for those people that really, really went above and beyond to make it happen, they probably felt very exhausted afterwards, and it was only the 20th of January. But actually, it's meant we can move on from that bit instead of that, because when you lengthen everything out, often people dedicate more time to it. But because we got it done fast, it's done. Everyone's here. It means we can invest all our energy into the future. And I'm sort of a big fan of making faster decisions and implementing them, and then making sure you put your energy into making those decisions good ones. If you just procrastinate about what the right decision is, then it's wasted energy quite often. I think you can often think too little about a decision, but I think quite often you can think way too much about what the right call is, rather than getting on with it and just making it a good decision out the other side when by investing time and energy in making it good. So I mean, I suppose those would be the key things I would say. I mean, we're now sort of 3 months later, so it's not like been a ton of time to finish the task of integrating two fantastic groups of people. We're still on that journey, but I definitely feel that transparency and regular communication is something that we have promised and I think kept up. I mean, we did it before the two agencies came together, but we had moved to a weekly agency format meeting rather than a monthly agency meeting format. So we can update people quickly and regularly on stuff. And that has really helped us. But just thinking about how can we make sure that the leadership are very closely connected to the teams, and that there is a line of communication where we're able to make sure everybody understands what's going on. Now, again, and I always say this, you will notice, but the people to ask are the people in the agency, not me. But that's been the intent. I'm sure some of what I've said has been achieved better than some of the rest of it in reality, but I think that's been the ambition. And I think setting that as the ambition has enabled us to move further faster, definitely. And I hope people feel supported at a time of change. And I hope people feel like they belong to this new agency we've created, whichever of the two agencies they came from previously.
It's interesting because we're getting more and more calls about TUPE, which is the
Yeah.
contract whereby if you're moving from one agency to another, but you're staying on the same account, this is put in place to protect your contracts. But unfortunately, it's not always dealt with in a way where people are communicated to and they don't necessarily feel heard. So it sounds to me as though you did all the right things to tell people what was happening and why it was happening, and also maybe setting some expectations around the new culture. Was there some work around that?
Yes, but I think there's more work to come. Uh, I think we were clear about what the priorities were and how we wanted this to feel. And again, a former boss said to me, culture is the behavior of management or behavior of leadership. So sometimes you can attempt to define it a bit too much in some ways, I think. I think you can also attempt not to define it at all, and that's a problem. But leading by example is so important. And so I think, again, we're sort of learning as a as a new leadership team how to do that. But I hope we have sent the right signals. Yeah, and culture. If I judge by momentum and uh, the vibe within the agency, it definitely feels like we're moving forward at speed now.
How do you create a culture where people feel heard and understood, especially when you're in a merger situation? So you've made sure you're communicating to them and you're having weekly team meetings and you're telling them what they need to know. But how do you ensure that there's that two-way mechanism so that people can really share what's going on for them, and then you have this value exchange where really people really
Mm.
care about where they are and what they're doing?
You have to say that you have to let people know that we want to listen. It sounds obvious, but I think quite often people don't necessarily think leadership do want to listen. And so I think the critical, and by the way, that doesn't mean you just go, "We're, oh, don't worry, we're absolutely going to listen to you." You need to make them feel like you are going to listen to them. So I think we were lucky because we had two agencies who already had that as part of their cultural sort of setup, but sort of reminding people of that. I mean, the other thing, I'm about to press send today or tomorrow on an agency survey that will go out as well, which actually we probably wish could have gone out sooner, which is mainly my fault that it's not gone out sooner. But because trying to get an early benchmark for where people are feeling is important. First of all, so they can be heard, and then secondly, so that we can have more than anecdotal conversational information to base our decisions on and to work out what we're going to do in response. But also because actually, unless you've got a data point to say this is where we're at now, you don't know how far you've progressed. And again, in the end, what we do is quite simple. You need to, as leaders, you've got to take a company from A to B, but unless you can't get to B unless you know where A is. Like, where are you at right now?
Yeah.
You have to establish where things are at now. So I think that's the other thing. So do it in a structured way. So our survey will go out and help us to learn more because we certainly won't have got nearly everything right yet. And again, there just needs to be some humility and understanding that that's the case. So we will ask people, they will be able to say whatever they want anonymously, and then we will consolidate that learning and act accordingly. And then we will measure it again in X number of months' time, let's say 6 months' time, to see whether we've made any progress. And so some metrics are also really useful as well in this stuff. We're also measuring how many people in the agency have worked uh, on a on a team or a brand that wasn't in the agency they were originally joining us from. So if you are an AMV person, have you touched a piece of business that was an FCB London piece of business and vice versa? So that's an interesting metric too. So yeah, so I don't believe in like too many metrics, but some things to say where are we at and where do we want to be and what are the things we could measure in order to make sure we are turning this into a wonderful single company that feels like more than a sum of its parts is always useful.
A big believer in a staff survey and actually getting that data in that you can then do something with and understand. So that all sounds super encouraging. How do you, as a leader, support yourself through the potentially incredibly stressful
Mm.
process of merging? It sounds as though you did a hell of a lot of work in a very short space of time. Plus, you've still got all of your family stuff going on and everything else that you are concerned with, responsible for in life. What were you doing to check in with yourself and make sure that you were okay?
Honestly, not enough. So interesting to reflect, and it's useful to reflect because having been through a period of time where some of my family were having mental health challenges, I think it's fair to say I've probably been through a few mental health challenges in probably more mental wellness challenges than mental illness challenges, but probably got closer than I'm prepared to admit to that tipping point. And so the good thing was I did talk very open, like this is something I would never have done tennis, but talk very openly with my family about how I was feeling. And that has been incredibly useful and important. And wife in particular has been a very good sounding board in ways that sometimes feel uncomfortable to me, but actually have been really important. But also you just have to, you do have to almost ask yourself, is how I'm feeling all right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are are you okay, mate? You need to ask that about yourself, and also you need to be honest with yourself in that moment as well, because I think sometimes uh, particularly those of us that have built up resilience over many years, you sort of get used to going, yeah, I am like just going to grind through. But actually, you have to really ask yourself that question and ask yourself whether it's normal to feel this anxious or normal to not be sleeping like you normally are. All of these things, these are all like good signifiers for, is everything okay? And then you have to, yeah, then again, you just have to prioritize yourself to enough of a degree to be able to get through. I also just think context and perspective is so useful. I think when you're stuck in it, you don't do enough to take a step back and actually look at the whole thing, by which I mean your life,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
industry, everyone in business anywhere in the world right now, to really understand whether this is happening to just you or whether this is something that's happening to everybody,
Yeah.
and which bits of it are happening to you, not everybody. Now, I think I was in a position where most of it was happening to everybody, and some of it I wasn't dealing with in the way that I was normally brilliant at doing. So I had to fess up to myself that I was ignoring some important signals. I also had to, which in some ways is the easy bit, but then you have to do something about it. That's
That's
the
the hard bit. That's the work.
So you have to sort of go, well, what am I going to do about that? So then you have to do some things, and probably won't go into the things I did, but I've had to have a word with myself. I've had to have a look at, had to take a step back to remind myself that I am, a both need to look after myself a bit more, but also in the grand scheme of things, actually, I'm probably in a better, better state than I might reasonably expect myself to. Well, too, you're like, well, actually, like, there's another version of this where you might be here, which you're not.
Yeah.
So context and perspective so important, and I think the further you get into a mental wellness challenge, I think you lose that perspective at an accelerating speed. So yeah, so I think that those are some of the things I would say. I mean, I could wang on for hours about it, but yeah, does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. It strikes me that's where you're going for a run was really useful because that's just you and your endorphins, and getting yourself out of a space physically can give you some perspective mentally.
Well, and outside, I mean, again, without sort of sounding too like a hippie, but I actually think this isn't at all soft. It's a very important, like getting outside in natural light, in nature, in the real world, and out of your normal sort of surprisingly small world you inhabit. It's so important. It's so important, and everyone will do their own thing. But I also don't listen to music when I run. It's funny. I listen to music almost every other moment of my life outside of work. But when I run, I don't listen to anything. I just allow myself to sort of just be. And once you've been running for 20, 30 minutes, and I can't actually manage to run for much longer than that anymore, but you do find yourself starting to not think actively and doing a bit more just being. And that also is very, that's a good rinsing process, I find.
Very good. So it almost makes me want to run.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Everyone chooses their own thing.
Exactly.
But yeah,
Now, how does the Adland community lift you up?
I mean, I suppose I don't really know any other industry than this. I mean, I worked client side for a little while, um, but I do think at its best, this industry is so passionate about what it does, and I think it's so important to be involved in something where passion exists and where your passion is shared. And I happen to be someone that loves this industry and wants it to succeed. So being surrounded by people that also want that, um, and to have got to the stage in my career where I can actually play a role in it too. I think it's just amazing the generosity of people. I don't ask often enough sometimes to sort of talk to, to get advice from people out in the industry. But to anybody listening to this, I would say just deliberately ask. I've certainly never really said no to someone that said, "Can I just pick your brains on something?" But but I've had the experience of the same way. Like whoever I've ever asked to pick their brains has always said yes, and I hope that's true in life. But I do think that's a particular truth about our industry. It's a very generous industry at its best. We're also fiercely competitive as well, but I think it is an industry. It's an industry that likes to hate on itself as a whole. So I think we all like to predict the death of this industry sort of once every fortnight. Um, but for the last 30 years, and yet we are still here and evolving successfully. But but I think that when it comes to how we treat each other, I think we've got better and better at that over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I would say so. And certainly in terms of the industry supporting NAB so that we can all work together on supporting each other, that's just getting better and better. Then if you have been affected by anything that Zav's talked about today, then give the NAB's advice line a call. We will pop the details in the show notes at the end. We have talked a lot about all the different ways you can support yourself and have a word with yourself. If you were to pick out one thing about what you've learned to support yourself, if I had to say, look, it's just you, this one thing in a desert island, what is that one thing?
I don't think life's like that. I don't think life's just binary. But maybe I'm going to say two things, which won't surprise you. But I think the first one is at some point you have to share how you're feeling with people,
Yeah.
and and that's true whether it's someone in your family who is experiencing difficulties or whether it's you. And then I think you have to look after yourself physically, because if you really don't prioritize that, if you don't prioritize getting enough sleep, you don't prioritize eating in a way that, by the way, big fan of fast food. I wouldn't cast myself as a healthy eater, but getting that balance right and starting to understand the things that are going to help give you more energy, not less. I think you have to think about what is going to give you energy. So maybe if I boiled it down to one thing, that would be it. Look, we've got there in the end.
Got there.
What it is that's going to give you more energy, not less. And you'll be surprised, even when the chips are down and you think you really don't have many choices, you always have got choices to kind of maybe do some things differently from how you're doing them, to give yourself that energy, to enable yourself to thrive.
I love that. And that's something that we've all got a little bit of control over. So thank you so much for sharing with us and being so open and honest. You have been absolutely marvelous, as I knew you would be. Thank you so much, Zav.
It's a pleasure. Amazing questions and good silences while I had to keep on blooming talking as well. But real pleasure and good luck to NABS, such an important organisation within our industry. You talk about an industry that is passionate and wants to support each other. NABS is the epitome of that. So delighted to talk to you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Zav.